All right. My name is Sable Boroff, and I'm here at Triangle Square. And I'm going to be talking my history talk today about the history of domestication of horses. And I loved horses when I was a little girl. I was fascinated with them, which is one of the reasons I wanted to do this talk. And I'm not the only one that's been fascinated by horses. Humanity has been fascinated by horses. The earliest mention of horses for the human race is 30,000 BC in the Paleolithic drawings on the caves. They drew more horses than any other animal. And probably they were hunting them for meat. They probably weren't riding them at that point, but they were fascinated by them, early man. And then they were in Europe. They were in the steppes of Russia, which is like the Eurasian area, and Crimea, the southern Russia. And it was a lot of grassland. And the horses were there, and about 4000 BC, there's some evidence of domestication where they were actually trying to ride them. And that was 4000 BC in Kurdistan and those areas. And the reason we have any evidence of domestication, because actually all the gear and everything was probably leather and it probably disappeared. In the burial mounds, they can tell by the horse skeletons with their teeth that there was some wear where the bit would have been, where they were trying to guide them with a rope and everything. It wore on their teeth. So that's one of the reasons they think they were domesticated. And there's other areas in that area of ancient burials with wooden posts that aren't even there anymore, but there's evidence they were there, that look like a corral. And they tested the soil around these posts, and they found a very high incidence of chemicals indicating horse dung. So it looked like they were actually in corrals. And that's one reason that they think they were actually domesticating them. And also, starting at that time and onwards, there were burials of warriors with horses. And they would bury the horse with the warrior. And they also had gear that were buried. When they had metal gear later on, they would bury that with the bits. And then they invented stirrups about 700 AD. So they were... all these was going on. And then in about 2000 AD, and there were also horse artifacts like carvings of horses that were later on buried in burials. So that's indicating people were dealing with horses. And about 2000 BC, they invented the chariot, which made a huge difference in warfare. And then around 3000 BC and onwards, the horses were spreading. They went from the steppes of Russia, they went all the way over Europe, they went to India and China, and there's again evidence in burials there that they had horses there. And in America, in 8000 BC, the horses disappeared. There were horses here, but 8000 BC, they all went extinct. So there were no horses in the New World until the Europeans and Spanish came over. They brought horses with them. Some of them escaped, and then the Native Americans were able to use them because they were breeding them from the wild horses that escaped from the Spanish. But the interesting thing about horses is, which you probably won't realize, they were a huge game changer for the human race. I mean, they literally changed the world almost more than anything else. Because when you think that a man can walk 4 miles an hour, maybe carrying 50 pounds, and that is a heavy load, as anyone can tell you. I wouldn't want to try it with my back. But that's it. You got no wheels, you got no animal, you maybe have a dog that'll drag something for you. But a horse can go 100 miles a day. They can carry up to 200 pounds. And also, if you've got a cart with a horse, you can carry 2,000 pounds. And this literally changed the entire world. It changed warfare, because when they came in mounted on horses, they just conquered other peoples. It was huge in battle to have a horse. I mean, it gives you a tremendous advantage. And also it made a huge difference in trade, because humanity could go far farther and faster than they ever could before. So the human race expanded over new territories. Trade took off all around the world, and they were able to trade with wagons now, with horses. They could carry goods, and they spread civilization, they spread language, they spread technology, all because of the horse. And it was a big, big deal. And actually, horses were the most important military weapon up to World War I. Even after they had rifles, horses were, a huge game changers. And so it really was a big, big difference for the human race. And it also enabled them to start civilization, building big cities, because you could transport food around much easier and have more people in one place. When you have more people in one place, you've got language, written language happening, you've got art happening, people have the leisure time to create monumental buildings, civilizations, politics, society. I mean, it really was tremendously important. And you can have more food, you can herd more cows and sheep than you could before. I mean, the horse could pull a plow, and that enabled you to farm better. I mean, it was an amazing, amazing thing. Stirrups were invented in China in 300 AD. In Europe, it took them 300 years after that to figure it all out. Like many things from China, they were there first. Anyway, so horses are terrific, and I've always loved horses. And I wanted to go over now some, and also you could have a rapid messenger like the Pony Express in the US, enable them to carry messages. In these big empires like the Holy Roman Empire, horses had a lot to do with that. You could have quick messaging from one end of your empire to the other. It just was tremendously important. So I wanted to move on now to some famous horses. So this is sort of a fun part. And horses were herd animals, so they were more amenable to being domesticated because they were used to being in social groups with each other. So it was sort of a step forward that a human being would tell them what to do, but they were sort of more suited to it than other animals like cats, who are pretty solitary and don't listen to anybody. Let's see. So I wanted to move on to, now these are some famous horses. So Alexander the Great has his horse Bucephalus. I probably am massacring the pronunciation, but he was a big black fiery stallion, and when Alexander was 12 years old, he tamed him, and nobody could tame him, and Alexander tamed him. I'm going to be talking about Alexander the Great in my next lecture, so I'll save that story. But it gave Alexander the confidence to conquer the world when he conquered this horse, and he did it without hurting him. So I wanted to start out some more famous horses. Now, Lady Godiva, who is Keith made the poster for this chat with a picture of Lady Godiva and me on her rear end. So I was riding a horse too, but I'm not going anywhere without my clothes because my hair is way too short and can't cover all the nasty bits. But Lady Godiva was the wife of an earl. She was in 1043 in England. And her husband was an earl and very powerful. Now, she was very religious, and she donated a lot of money to religion. But her husband was very cruel, and he was taxing all the poor people way too much, and they were really suffering. And she begged and begged him to lower the taxes, and he wouldn't do it. Finally, being, a nasty man, he said, well, if you'll ride naked throughout the town, I'll lower the taxes for the people. And because she was really a good person, and she was very religious, so it was very shameful and hard for her to ride naked. I mean, she was, very strict morally. But the story is that she did it, and she had long hair and it covered everything. And she asked the townspeople who loved her to close their doors and not look. So she rode through the town, and one guy looked, and his name was Tom. And there's where we get Peeping Tom. That's where that comes from.
I didn't know that.
She was the only one in the town that looked at her, the little bum. And, but actually, probably, the legend actually didn't get started till 200 years later. So it's possibly not even,
Right.
never even happened, but it's a great story, so we'll keep it.
Samuel.
And then Marengo was the name of the Arabian horse that Napoleon rode in the Battle of Waterloo. Copenhagen was the Duke of Wellington's horse who went up against Napoleon and he won. And there was also Seabiscuit, who was a racehorse who was very lazy and less than perfectly looking. But his trainer had faith in him, and it was a very inspiring story of how he trained him to win all those races. And for anybody who's been in the military, there was a horse called Sergeant Reckless, who was the most decorated horse in U.S. military history. It was a female horse. In 1952, she was in the Korean War, and she was a pack horse, and she carried huge loads all by herself. And also, sometimes she would walk through the battlefield. There were guns blazing everywhere. She would carry these huge loads, and then she would carry wounded soldiers back to safety.
Amazing.
And she made it through all of the war okay, and the soldiers would feed her scrambled eggs and bacon and toast in the morning. And she was promoted to staff sergeant. In 1960, she got all these awards. She got 2 Purple Hearts because she was wounded in battle, Good Conduct Medal, a Presidential Citation, a Korean Service Medal, a United Nations Service Medal, and a Republic of Korea Presidential Unit Citation. So she was the most decorated horse in U.S. military history. And the next one I want to mention is called Beautiful Jim Key, who was the smartest horse in the world. He could count, spell words, pick letters, use the phone, take cash to the register, and bring back change. And it was a huge circus act seen by 10 million people in the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. Dr. William Key was a former slave, an African American. He was a self-taught veterinarian, and he advocated kind treatments of animals in a time when many people were quite brutal to animals. And the SPCA he was the first African American ever awarded a humanitarian gold medal by them. And he broke down barriers for blacks, and this was, about 50 years after the Civil War. And he also got people to treat animals more kindly and made a big platform for that. So he really changed the world. And in 1932, Trigger was born, who was Roy Rogers' Palomino, I think he was a Palomino stallion. And he spent 20 years in each of 81 films with Roy Rogers and all 100 of Roy Rogers' TV episodes. He knew 150 tricks.
What?
I mean, that's better than most dogs. And he was potty trained, so he would visit sick kids in the hospital.
Oh, you never.
And then so that's a nice story. And of course, I always watched Roy Rogers when I was a kid.
Me too.
And then in 1961 there was Mr. Ed, who was the talking horse, and I remember watching
Mr.
that
Ed.
too. So there's a lot of other famous horses, but I just wanted to finish with that. And it's been a lot of fun researching this, and I learned a lot of stuff. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right.